everybody. So I'm the co-founder of a startup, Newfini, in Germany. We are creating a wearable device which tracks your brainwaves and uses different meditation techniques to achieve the desired state. Desired states such as sleep, focus, and concentration. And the motivation behind our product and research, and actually when we started, actually comes from Dr. Jeff Tarrant. So I have to give him the credit here. Thanks for joining us, Jeff. Should I call you Dr. Jeff or Jeff?
Whatever you prefer. I don't worry about that.
Perfect. So I'll call you Jeff then.
Great.
So thank you so much for joining us for the live session. It's lovely having you here. So firstly, I would like you to introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Jeff Tarrant, and I'm a psychologist in the United States, based in Eugene, Oregon. And most of my work right now is really directing the.
Yeah.
Is it okay? Sound okay?
Yes.
Okay. Most of my work right now is directing the NeuroMeditation Institute here. And so there's really kind of two different aspects, actually more than that, of kind of the work we're doing. But a big part of it is exactly what was just described, combining technology, EEG, biofeedback, and other technology with meditative states. But specifically for, in our case, for improved mental health. That's kind of our angle. And so that's what we're doing. So we provide classes and workshops and trainings and, work with individuals in our center.
Since actually I've always wanted to ask this, but this is the first time I actually am there with one-on-one with you. So I'll ask, what was your motivation behind this? Because what you are doing and for past so many years, it's really amazing, because you're a psychologist, you've learned about neuroscience, and you have learned, I think, 6 different meditation techniques. That's what I at least got from the internet. This combination is very difficult to get in people. So what was your really motivation? There must have been this day, or this is the first time I actually am there with one-on-one with you. So I'll ask, share that. What was your motivation behind this? Because what you are doing,
I've been a neurofeedback practitioner for 20-something years, and used that as my primary work as a psychologist. So, but from a traditional neurofeedback perspective. So I'd been doing that for a long time. And then I'd also been involved in meditation and
for the live session. Okay, just I think something is okay. Yeah, it's perfect.
You okay?
Yeah, something is weird. Yeah.
Okay, no problem. But then, had also been involved in meditation and Qigong and other contemplative practices. And, a lot of the field of neurofeedback actually grew from trying to do this, so trying to understand how to use neurofeedback for meditation, in the 1960s.
Wow.
And so, honestly, I started trying to figure out how to do this and study what had already been done. But it was interesting. Had also been involved in meditation and honestly, what happened was I was invited to write a book chapter. And a lot of the field of neurofeedback, I asked the guy who was editing the book, so trying to understand what do you want me to write about neurofeedback for meditation. He said, I don't care. What do you want to write about?
Wow.
And so, honestly, I don't know if it was divine. I started trying to figure out how to do this. It just came out of my mouth, and I said, how about neuromeditation? And he said, it was okay. It's also been involved. And I was like, oh, wow. And honestly, what happened, I guess I have to figure this out. I was invited to write a book chapter. Honestly, it was sort of, a lot of this happened because I just sort of said, I'm going to do this. And I really didn't know what I was getting myself into. And then it really forced me to really study everything and put my kind of practical understanding of neurofeedback and meditation, to work in combination with the research and what we actually know from a research perspective. And so it really, this whole thing has happened very organically. It's just been developing 1 month at a time. And, it started off really with that book chapter, and now it's grown to be, kind of this international program, and it's what I do full time now. So I don't know. It's just sort of happened.
So maybe let me say that it was destined that you came to this field, right? One question is
Sure.
that what got you into meditation? So because at that time I don't think so it was that popular in US.
No, it was not. And I was actually living in the middle of the United States at the time in Missouri, which is a pretty conservative state. And, yeah, in the 1980s, 1990s, meditation was not, nobody even knew what it was. They thought it was some sort of voodoo or something that, and, I honestly don't know what it was exactly when I was an undergraduate in school. At the university, I, was exposed to some of these ideas and they just really made sense to me. And so, I took every class I could find on Hinduism and Buddhism and Asian philosophy. And it just made sense. It just made sense to me. But it took a while to find a teacher to learn how to practice. I had studied, the intellectual parts of it, but really didn't understand the practice until years later when I found a Zen teacher. He's a professor at the university I was at. And so that was really, what really sort of took it from just book learning to, actually doing something.
Okay, that's really amazing, actually. So nice. In our last session on International Yoga Day, we actually got 5 different people from India who teach meditation as a part of their psychiatric practice or as a part of their healing practice. And there we discussed what really is meditation, because a lot of Germans have asked us here, what is meditation? And it's, for us, it's like, how do I even explain that? So we actually got a platform that we can help ask experienced people what really is meditation. But you have done neuromeditation. So I would ask you can you please explain how meditation rewires our brain?
Sure. Well, I'll try. So, the way that we approach this kind of idea, and the question of what is meditation, it's such a big question, right? And different philosophies and different traditions have different ways of kind of thinking about what meditation is. And I think they're all right. I think they're all correct. And so this makes it kind of tricky because that means meditation is a lot of things. It's not one thing. And, so from our perspective, we think of it as sort of mental training, that, regardless of what tradition you come from or what you're doing, you're training your attention, you're training how you pay attention and the intention behind what you're doing. And so really our perspective is that how you direct your attention and your intention determines how your brain is going to respond. So, we know from the research that, like I just said, meditation isn't one thing. If you direct your attention in specific ways, it activates certain brain regions and quiets down other brain regions. And if you do a different kind of meditation, one thing, it affects the brain differently. And so the way that meditation appears to change the brain is through repetition. It's an exercise. So we use the metaphor a lot of sort of like going to the gym to build your muscles. That if you use certain muscle groups over and over, they get stronger, they get bigger. And that's the way the brain works, is if you use certain circuits, certain, brain networks repeatedly, they get stronger, they get more flexible. And that seems to be what's happening with meditation. And so, you can actively choose which parts of your brain you want to make stronger by choosing your meditation style.
Okay, so it's actually, we think that our brain is controlling us, this is something that you cannot change, but that's really not the case. We can actually control our brain the way we want. So we are not the puppet here.
Right. And actually, I think that's really important. And, it's something that, I think we don't fully understand, especially in the United States. People have the idea that, your thoughts just happen or your feelings just happen and that you don't have any control over that. And they almost feel like a victim to what's happening internally. And the reality, of course, is that you can learn to control all of that. We have a lot of power. And even with the brain, even if parts of the brain aren't doing their job very well, very efficiently or very effectively, we can train the brain to get stronger, to get better. Now there's certain circumstances or certain things that, you're probably not going to be able to have much of an impact on.
True.
But there's a lot that we can affect. And, and we know this. I mean, we know that the brain is plastic, that that it changes based on what we do, everything we do. And so I think this is the part that's also tricky, is that it means we have a lot of responsibility. And I think in some cases, people don't want that much responsibility.
Yes. That's actually very true, because it's easy to, I think, be a victim of your thoughts rather than actually controlling your thoughts, because then, as you said, you become responsible for your actions, and people really don't like that.
Yeah. It's it's kind of intense to think that it's like, well, if your brain's not behaving a certain way, what is your role in that? And again, it's not to sort of blame people if their brains don't behave the way that they like.
Really don't like that.
And there's a level of responsibility that we have to take for ourselves. That, if you want to change the way that you think, if you want to change the way your brain functions, that you can do that, but it takes work. And that's another thing that I think is important to understand from this perspective, is that meditation isn't necessarily just about relaxing and feeling good. That can happen, and it can be a byproduct. But sometimes it's work, and it takes dedication and it takes effort. And again, I think that's what makes it challenging for a lot of people is, it's hard to put in that much time every day. And especially when you feel like maybe you're not very good at it, or you don't know what you're doing. And so again, that's partly our motivation, is to try to make this more user-friendly for people, to help them understand how this works from kind of a science-based perspective.
Exactly.
So that it's just easier for people to understand what's happening, and hopefully increase their motivation for why they might want to do this.
This is really good, because when we were in India, we were really not that into meditation. We always thought that it has a more religious context to it, but that's really not the case, because we always wanted a scientific explanation, and nobody was giving us that. So we actually thought that it was hocus pocus, and we still. Now, I don't believe that, but I know a lot of people do believe this. So you also have a book, Meditation Interventions to Rewire the Brain, and that's especially for ADHD, PTSD, depression, and stress. So can meditation be harmful?
I'm sorry, that last...
Can meditation be harmful?
Sorry, the signal's kind of choppy. I can't quite... The signal's kind of choppy.
My question was, can meditation be harmful for such cases?
Sorry. It's still kind of cutting in and out, and I can't really quite hear.
Is it better now?
Oh, yeah, there we go. Yeah,
okay.
I can hear you.
So, can meditation be harmful for cases such as PTSD and ADHD?
Oh, wow. Yeah, great question. So, this is a really interesting, and it's kind of a big question, because, again, people, in the United States in particular, I don't know, I'm not sure about other countries, but, now, because meditation and mindfulness have become so popular, that it's kind of put out there as a solution for everything. That mindfulness is a cure for things. And that makes me a little nervous because it's not really taking an individual approach. It's kind of suggesting that one particular way of doing things will work for everybody. And, we just know that that's just not true. And in fact, it can be harmful in certain ways. Let's stick with PTSD for just a second, because that's the one that we're very concerned about. Is, we kind of talk about having a trauma-informed approach to meditation, and really understanding that certain types of meditation and certain ways of paying attention can actually be really difficult for people that have unresolved trauma. And so, the example that we use a lot of times is with mindfulness, something as simple as like a body scan meditation, where you're asking people to notice and pay attention to what's happening in the body, what's happening with their thoughts, what's happening with their feelings, and accept that and be present with it and sit with it and just be there. And, if your thoughts are connected to your trauma, or you start to relax and there's sensations in your body that are connected to your trauma response, this can be very, very unpleasant. And in fact, what happens is sometimes people will have an anxiety response when they're meditating. This happens actually about 18% of people when they relax. 18% of people when they relax.
Yeah, I have actually experienced this. So I think I tried mindfulness. I tried one of the surveys on your website, but that I got mindfulness. But the first experience of doing that actually gave me a anxiety feeling. And I was about to sleep, and it gave me like, I was very much awake.
Yeah. And I'm getting a little bit of feedback. I don't know if you can hear that. Can you hear the feedback on
No.
Okay. Maybe it's just on my computer. Yeah, and this is something that is actually pretty common, and it doesn't get talked about enough. And we feel like it's very important, because what is likely to happen is that a lot of people, if that's their first experience with meditation, they're not going to do it ever again. And they're going to think that they did something wrong. Something's wrong with them because they can't meditate.
Exactly.
And the reality is that wasn't the right meditation for them, or they weren't given the right instructions. And so for us, it's really important that we let people know that some of those things can happen, that it can bring up anxiety, it can bring up uncomfortable feelings. And if that happens, to give people a lot of options and choices for how they can respond to that. So they don't have to just sit there and, swim in their anxiety. That's not really what we want. That's not what we want. And so, to really kind of so we talk about an individualized approach, and we talk about a developmental approach, meaning that, if we're asking somebody to do something that they can't do, well, then how's that going to be helpful? That's not helpful. So we need to back it up and meet people where they're at. And so, meet them where they're at and help them develop some skills. And then as those skills get stronger and more developed, then, we can expand the types of and help them develop that they're involved in. Same with ADHD. ADHD is a little bit different, but, ADHD is actually characterized by having a slow brain, too much slow brainwave activity. It doesn't mean they're not smart. It has nothing to do with intelligence. It just, there's just a lot of slow brainwave activity, which is why they tend to do well with stimulants, because when you wake the brain up, it functions better. And so it's interesting, because a lot of meditation styles are actually increasing slow brain waves. So, transcendental meditation, Zen, things like that, they're actually increasing slow brain waves. And so for somebody that has ADHD or depression, you don't want to do that. You don't want more slow brain waves. You've already got enough. You've got too many. And so this is where, again, we can take an individual approach and understand who is this person, what are their goals, what are they trying to accomplish, and help them find a style that's going to be a good match for what they're trying to do.
Yeah, because this is very important. We hear so many people talking about meditation and mental health, but they are really not talking about the science, which is very important, because if you are not understanding the base behind either of these things, we will diagnose the disease wrong. And disease such as stress, depression, anxiety, because normal people kind of think that these are synonyms.
Yeah.
A person is stressed, a person is depressed. All these things are really not clear for a layman. So the science is really important. So I have a question for you. Can we control and drive the way our brain gets rewired? So if I am a very emotional person, can I change that aspect about myself? Or maybe somebody lacks focus and wants to be more focused. Can we control these things?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of give a sort of kind of a straightforward example, because some of this can get kind of complicated, but so like a focus type meditation. So, some people will call it a concentration practice or focused attention, but any kind of a meditation practice where you are holding your attention on a single object, so the breath or a mantra or whatever, doesn't really matter. And you're working to catch the brain as soon as it wanders off. As soon as you mind wander, you catch it and you bring it back. So it's a very basic form of meditation, although it's very hard, very difficult to do. But it's kind of like, you pick up a book on meditation and that's probably what they're going to describe. Focus on your breath. When your mind wanders, bring it back. Now, what we know is that if you're actually doing that the way it's designed, if you're really doing a focused meditation, it's actually activating your frontal lobes. It's because your frontal, you need activation in the frontal lobes in order to sustain your attention. And so, holding your attention involves the frontal lobes, but also inhibiting your response to other things activates the frontal lobes. And so even though that practice is very basic, at a minimum, you have to do those two things. You have to hold your attention on one thing, which is hard enough. And then you have to inhibit your response to everything else. I'm not going to think about Netflix. I'm not going to think about taking a hike. I'm not going to think about calling my mom. You're just focused on your breath, and that's it. And so when you do that, you're exercising and growing your frontal lobes. And so over time, what happens is that those same skills start to transfer into other parts of your life. You're able to sustain your attention on other things outside of meditation. You're able to inhibit your impulses to other things, which is what a lot of emotion regulation requires. What you have to be able to inhibit your emotional responses. You have a response, but then you have to be able to stop yourself and look at it and go, okay, what's going on here? And how can I manage this? So, using that frontal lobe and really getting it working and working well goes a long way. And so something as simple as a focus practice can do that.
Okay. And what are the different kind of things we can control about our personality? One is focus, one the same as concentration, the other might be empathy.
Yeah, you can certainly develop empathy. And so, of course, that's going to be things more like loving kindness or compassion practices or gratitude, forgiveness, any kind of a meditation practice that involves, we kind of talk about them as positive emotional states, where you are actively engaging, you're learning to engage these very big emotions. And usually when you're doing that in these meditations, you're activating the emotion and then you're doing something with it. You're giving it to yourself, or you're sending it to your loved ones or
Mhm.
parts of the world that are struggling. And so, that aspect in and of itself, it's activating those parts of the brain, the insula, the inferior parietal lobule, parts of the brain that are involved in perspective taking
Yeah.
and empathy.
Mhm.
You see this in the monks that, Richie Davidson's work with the Tibetan monks,
Yes.
and looking at what's going on in their brains when they're doing a compassion practice.
Mhm.
And, they're lit up. They're not slowed down. It's
Oh my
it's
God.
the fastest brain waves. They have 3 times as much gamma activity as a
Mhm.
control group, and
Okay.
so and it's specifically in those parts of the brain involved in, empathy and perspective taking.
Mhm.
And so, we know we can train this, we can develop it.
Mhm.
And again, it kind of gets to one of those early points we were making, that people kind of have the idea that they can't really control that.
Mhm.
And there's a lot that we can learn how to do, how to be more compassionate, how to be more empathic, but we have to practice.
Exactly.
We have to practice.
Okay. One question which is off the script but actually comes from the conversation. So depression can be diagnosed by the brain waves, and also because if I talk in a layman language, it's because of the lack of some hormones that we can detect that a person has depression. And nowadays there are a lot of medications for it. So I personally am against medication. I prefer natural well-being practices such as yoga and meditation. And because even for physical illnesses, I don't prefer medications. So what is your take on this? Because a lot of people now I want instant solution, which is medication, but I think it kind of results in a dependency and addiction rather than healing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I'm not necessarily against medications, and I worry about the way that they're used.
Mm-hmm.
I In general, I think of them as a tool,
Mm-hmm.
and usually as a temporary tool.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, like let's pick on, sort of ADHD, right? Which is, usually the first solution that people think of for ADHD is taking medication, taking a
Mm-hmm.
stimulant.
Okay.
And um, and if somebody has a slow brain pattern, that can help. It's going to help. Um, and it's not really a solution, because we know from a lot of research that if you continually take a medication over time, it actually changes the way that the brain behaves naturally,
Mm-hmm.
and it makes the medication less effective over time. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, there's evidence that it can end up causing the same problems that it's trying to
Solve.
help, in the long term. And
Mm-hmm.
so to me, I don't see a lot of medications as being kind of a long-term solution.
Mm-hmm.
I used to work with a lot of kids, and there were some kids that really were struggling so profoundly that, I was like, it makes sense. Let's get them on some medication so they can at least function,
Mm-hmm.
but while we're doing that, we need to be doing other things. We need to get them change their diet and get involved in exercise and do some neurofeedback, and
Exactly.
get them so that they're not reliant on
Mm-hmm.
the medication, because in most cases it's not going to work in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
It'll work in the short run, and so that's my kind of take. That's my personal
Yeah, no, I actually
opinion.
agree upon that. So we actually have a lot of questions. I was so busy in the conversation, I kind of missed checking on them. So,
Sure.
how is it different from neuroplasticity exercise? So, what we do for meditation techniques, how they are really different from the neuroplasticity exercises?
Um, I think it would depend on what neuroplasticity exercises we're talking about, because so for instance, I just mentioned exercise a minute ago. We
Mm-hmm.
know that exercise changes your brain.
Mm-hmm.
And it changes a lot of different parts of the brain. But it's kind of non-specific, right? I mean, there's a lot of regions that get activity when you exercise, but we're not really training a specific mental skill. So you're changing your brain, but you're not really telling it what to do. So I think it depends on what kind of neuroplasticities, training we're talking about. Okay. I think where meditation is similar and different than other skills is when you're telling it, I'm using a focus meditation specifically to develop my frontal lobes for improved memory, for improved focus, for whatever, impulse control. Like, okay, if I'm doing that and you're doing other skills, other training, cognitive training that exercises similar circuits, it's probably similar in that regard. Okay. I mean, again, we kind of, we talk about meditation as mental training. It's training. It is training. It's just a specific way to do it. Okay. And, there's other ways to train your brain. And in fact, sometimes we will do things that we're calling a focus meditation that they don't necessarily look like a focus meditation. So, for example, if I've got a teenager or, maybe a 10-year-old where they're not going to sit and focus on their breath, it's just not going to happen. But, if I have them shooting free throws and, coaching them so that there's nothing else that exists. I don't exist. Nothing exists except for you, the basketball, and that net. Yeah. And if they can learn how to shift their attention into that kind of way of playing basketball, that's a focused meditation. It just doesn't look like what we think of.
Because we actually got a lot of questions in our last session from parents that how can they actually get their kids to sit and meditate, and kids are not the ones who want to sit and chant, right? And I feel that if kids start meditating at a very early age, it's really very useful in the long run. So I think these are the kind of techniques they can practice to get their kids to a more focused state.
Yeah, and this is, I think, where technology can be really helpful too. Because you can use neurofeedback or you can use other technology to make the experiences more engaging, for a younger audience or somebody who might struggle with that. And, there's some clever ways to do that where, you can teach people to pay attention in a specific way, but, you're giving them something external to pay attention to. What's happening on the screen is connected to their brain. It's connected to their attention. And so it's going to be way more interesting. They're basically controlling the computer screen with their brain. And, and so that's going to be way more interesting for a kid.
Yeah.
That, here's the other issue with that is that even if you can convince a kid to sit still and watch their breath for 10 minutes, the reality is, are they really sitting there and counting their breaths for 10 minutes? What are they doing? They're sitting there with their eyes closed, but what's happening internally? If they're just sitting there and thinking about their video games, that's not meditation. If they're sitting with their eyes closed for 10 minutes and thinking about Netflix, that's not meditation, So it's hard to know. It's hard to know what somebody's doing, if you can't monitor it.
Exactly. And now while we are doing all of this, I started realizing that when I was a kid and I had, I don't remember why I used to do that, but I always used to imagine a very big castle. And I slowly used to visualize when I was a kid, and I used to imagine walking inside the castle, and I used to decorate each of the rooms. And now I actually realized that was meditation, and that is visualization. I don't know why I did it, but I always liked that feeling of having a big castle and having that control. And that kind of, I think, made me my brain activity is very high generally. Yeah. But yeah, that was very helpful. We have one more question for you. Sure. Bhavya encountered a special ADHD case who had high beta. How can we cater to those special cases?
Yep. So yeah, really good point. So, I was kind of oversimplifying the discussion earlier and saying, that ADHD is characterized by really a slow brain. And, I would say that that's kind of the stereotypical brain pattern that you'll see with ADHD. But the reality is that you can also have problems with attention if you have a fast brain. It looks a little bit different, but so just a simple way to kind of think about it. If you've got a really fast brain, you may not be able to pay attention, but you're not paying attention because there's so much going on that it's like, oh my gosh, like you're thinking of this and you're thinking of this and you're thinking of this and you're thinking of this. And it's really hard to kind of stay in one spot. Whereas with the slow brain, it might be more like you're just kind of floating around and it's like, oh, whatever sort of grabs your attention, is what you pay attention to. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, what's that over there?
Exactly.
And so, but it could look the same on the outside, right? That both people are not paying attention, but they're not paying attention for different reasons, and that's important. And so if somebody has a fast brain, then it's a little bit of a different issue. Because instead of kind of activating those frontal lobes, you actually need to settle them down. Because they're so hyperstimulated that they can't focus. And so then practices like what we consider sort of mindfulness, and I say what we consider because a lot of people are using that term to mean all kinds of things right now. But we're talking about mindfulness as sort of observing what's happening in the moment without attaching to it, without judging it, allowing it to be there and then letting it go. And so when you're able to shift your attention into that style, one of the things that happens is it actually relaxes those frontal lobes. So it decreases activity in the frontal lobes. And it decreases those areas of the brain that are hyper alert and hyper focused. And so that's going to be a better approach for somebody with a fast brain. Now here's the tricky part, right? Is like, well, how do you know? I mean, obviously, if you have the ability to measure somebody's brainwave activity, well, then you can know very clearly. But if you don't have that ability, then you're kind of making your best guess. And that can be done really by sort of observing. What happens, for example, what happens when there's a lot of additional stimulation in the environment? When things are really busy, there's a lot going on. Is it overwhelming to the person? Or is that when they when they really turn on? Like that starts to give you some information. Like if you've got a fast brain, you're probably going to get overstimulated in certain situations. There's too much. And so looking at those kind of things, how do they respond to caffeine? Does it make them anxious? Or do they drink it, by the, a pot of coffee at a time, and it helps them sort of stay engaged and focused. So, you can start to kind of look at certain behaviors and go, I'm pretty sure this is what we're looking at. But again, you're kind of guessing unless you sort of,
science to back it up. Okay, so we have these were the questions. I have one question, and it's I think a little tricky. How different are the brain of men and women?
Oh boy. So honestly, the last research, I mean, I've not read, I'm not up to date on any current research here. So, I'm probably not, the best person to answer that question, but the latest stuff that I had seen when I looked at this years ago, and especially with EEG, with looking at brainwave activity, is that there's really not a significant difference. And a lot of the databases that are out there will ask you to identify, female or male, which, is a whole nother issue by itself, that you have to sort of pick one, right? But even that, even though you have to sort of choose one, researchers who have looked at that, it's like, it doesn't really seem to make much difference. And so, so in some ways, I think that's encouraging, right? That now, and again, my caveat that there could be research out there that shows certain kinds of differences that that I'm just not aware of. So, acknowledging that, I may be missing something here.
Okay, no problem. So it was just like, because we associate that women get more anxiety than men. And I think this is not a male or it's not a female dependent trait, but more or a brain dependent trait. So a man can also have a high activity brain, which can result into anxiety. And I think there are different causes there that men are not very open about these things. Women are more open because they can let out their emotions. So that kind of are different psychological. I think here I'm approaching the psychiatrist in you.
Yes. No, and I think that's a really good point, is that it's not just the brainwave activity, but it's how it gets manifest by the person's temperament, by their gender socialization, by, all of those things. So a good example is that, sometimes you do a brain map on somebody and you might see a lot of fast activity in that right frontal area. And just because you see a lot of fast activity there, you don't necessarily know what that is going to look like. So, okay, the right side, it's more social, emotional kinds of stuff. But it's interesting because you can see that with somebody who has social anxiety. And so they don't want to talk to anybody. They're kind of afraid to go out in public. They're afraid people are judging them. Now that's social emotional. You can also see it in people who are angry and fight everything, which is also an agitation here.
Okay.
And it's more external. And, and so just because you see that pattern in the brain, you don't know what it means necessarily. That you have to talk to the person and figure out, how is this showing up? So you're exactly right. So, somebody could have a fast brain pattern and it's causing agitation, but they're turning it into anger or.
Exactly. There are different ways of dealing with emotions and, as you said, high activity in this region. So I had a question. So in this manner, this kind of concludes also that it's very important that science in itself is not enough. We also need a psychological test where we can actually see the personality of the person, because the emotion might be same, but the way we portray is different.
Totally.
Right? And you have an amazing questionnaire. It's for all the viewers. Actually, he has an amazing questionnaire on his website. I think I have personally shared with a lot of people out of my personal curiosity that I think they should do this, but should they do this particular kind of meditation technique? But this is really helpful actually, because as I said in the beginning of the live session, and even now that we are approaching the end, that it's very important that the science, meditation, and psychology kind of work together. Can you just share one of the most stories close to your heart in this journey of your career, which kind of validates and which makes me or you glad that we are in the right space? Because this mental health is a very stressful topic, and it's very needed, especially now with the corona situation going on. So there must be one story which is very close to your heart. Can you just share that with us?
Well, I mean, it's actually a very recent, probably why it's on my mind is because it's fairly, recent, but, somebody that I've been working with, and, they have a fair amount of anxiety, and, it really kind of gets to the point that you're making, is that, they took the questionnaire, and the questionnaire showed up as quiet mind is what they needed the most. I was like, okay. And that's pretty typical with somebody with a lot of anxiety.
Yeah.
But then we did the interview and we looked at this person's brain and really figured out that, this person had a significant trauma history. And so, you got to be careful with quiet mind practices with somebody with a trauma history. And so it's like, okay, all right, well. And then we also figured out that this person has a tendency to leave their body as a defense mechanism, sort of dissociate.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I don't want to do quiet mind with them because
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be just make it too easy for that to happen.
Exactly.
And so, so we settled on a mindfulness practice that's involved in being in your body,
Mm-hmm.
staying in the body, noticing the sensations of the body. And, and if it gets uncomfortable, you can step out of that. It's okay. And then let's talk about it. And then let's step back in. And so, for me, this person in this case, I think it's really close to my heart because it's a perfect example of if you can take the time to really understand somebody's personal situation, then you can really help them find what's going to really make a difference. Whereas if I would have just said, oh, quiet mind, yeah, that's what you got on the quiz, do that. Probably it would have been very uncomfortable, or they would have just dissociated the whole time.
Yeah.
Which is not helpful. That wouldn't have been helpful. And so, anyway, I think that's why it's really resonating with me is that this person really is making a lot of progress. And I think the only reason is because we really took the time to be thoughtful about, what's happening for them and what's going to work best for them.
Perfectly. Thank you so much for sharing this story, because I think that especially with the current lockdown corona situation, this is the need of the hour. People are starting to realize more, they are being more self-aware, and this is what they really need, somebody who can actually help out and listen to them. So there comes the science and the psychology part. Thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us for this amazing live session. It's lovely talking to you. And I do want to tell our viewers, please check out the book from Dr. Jeff Tarrant. It's on the meditation interventions to rewire the brain. And if you want to know which meditation technique is good for you, first take the questionnaire and then we can approach him.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.